Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is Christina, and today's topic is how to unshackle the golden chain, competition and network effects in blockchain and cryptocurrency markets. Blockchain and cryptocurrency promise to decentralize modern financial markets to take market power away from centralized financial intermediaries and instead scatter it among the masses. But has it lived up to this promise? In this episode of Our Curious Amalgam, we'll explore how competition has evolved within blockchain and cryptocurrency markets and how to improve competition or outcomes within these markets. Joining me today is my co-host, Panos Dimitrellos. Hey, Panos.
Hi, Christina. Looking forward to being here today.
Very happy to have you. So can you tell us a little bit more about what we're talking about today and introduce our guest?
Sure. So our guest today is Professor Hanna Halaburda. Professor Halaburda is an associate professor of technology, operations, and statistics at NYU's Leonard and Stern School of Business, where she studies platform competition, payment systems, and the economics of digital currencies and blockchain technologies. She's the co-author of Beyond Bitcoin, the Economics of Digital Currencies. And she has held position at the Bank of Canada and Harvard Business School. Her recent work spans token economics, consensus mechanism for distributed ledgers, and how market structure and informed trading interact with miners, block builders, and execution agents. Professor Halaburda, welcome to our podcast. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So without further ado, we wanted to ask you so many questions, and we'll start from the basics. So for us, we're not blockchains expert, and to get everyone on the same page, could you explain in plain terms what is a blockchain and what is a cryptocurrency, and how can we distinguish between all these layers? We hear protocol layers, token layers, application layers.
So blockchain is a shared ledger. So technically it is a shared ledger. But what is even more important is that economically, blockchain protocol is a coordination mechanism to get strangers to agree on the same state of the ledger and without any centralized authority. So, for example, when Alice is sending 10 Bitcoins to Bob, there is no bank involved to verify those 10 Bitcoins. Instead, we have thousands of machines that agree on the update to the ledger. So this is slow, repetitive, and very costly, but it is providing a substitute for a trusted centralized authority. Now, when it comes to the different layers of the blockchain, we can think about it like a 3-layer cake. So we start with that protocol layer, and this is like an operating system. This is where those machines are agreeing on the common ledger. On top of it, we have a token layer. And this is how we access the functionality. This is what lets us interact with the system. This is what lets us send transfers, but also access applications, so dApps. And this is the 3rd layer of the cake, those applications. And this is where all functionality, aside for simple transfers, lay. This is where we have NFTs. This is where we have games. This is where we have decentralized finance, decentralized exchanges. They rely on these applications, rely on smart contracts that are accessed via tokens and then operationalized by those machines coordinating and agreeing on the common state of the blockchain.
Understood. And a follow-up about the lack of a central agency like a bank to verify how the ledger looks like. So one can think of a bank as an institution that has a legal interest to kind of ensure that the ledger is up to date and correct. What should we imagine as the main mechanism that gives all these different machines the motive to be truthful about the state of the ledger?
So they have incentives, economic incentives, to agree on the same state of the ledger. So those machines that are updating the system, they are doing some work. They are bearing some costs. Could be proof of work. It could be in the proof of work system. It could be computational work. In proof of stake system, it would be the cost of capital of staking. So they bear a cost. Now, if they create a ledger, if they update the ledger in such a way that they all agree, then those nodes that are doing this work, they get payment. They get extra tokens that are being created. They get transaction fees, but they will be able to withdraw this economic reward only if they all agreed on the fact that those machines got this reward. So if they do not agree, they cannot withdraw their reward.
And I know you've described this as blockchain. Where does cryptocurrency in particular fit in across the layers and in the ecosystem?
So in fact, there are different types of cryptocurrencies. In the old days, when I first started working on crypto in 2011, Bitcoin was the only game in town. And then we had altcoins, and then we had coins and cryptocurrencies, and then we had cryptocurrencies, coins, and tokens. And since then, all this nomenclature kind of merged, and we talk about coins, cryptocurrencies, and tokens in an interchangeable form. There are basically two types of cryptocurrencies. There are cryptocurrencies that are native to a blockchain. So that would be Bitcoins for Bitcoin blockchain. That would be Ether for Ethereum blockchain. And starting with the protocol layer, this is what gives the rewards to the nodes, to those machines to agree on the state. And this is how the gas fees, transactions fees are being paid in the protocol. And this is at the very, very basic layer of the blockchain. Now, all the other tokens like stable coins, tokens created in the smart contracts, these are in fact applications. So they also allow us to access economic activity, to make transfers. But the ledger, in a sense, they all have their own ledger. They all have their own state of the world. Who owns how many tokens? This is sitting in a smart contract in the application layer of the blockchain.
And on your book, Beyond Bitcoin, what should we expect to find beyond Bitcoin? Are there more economic functions that people use it for other than having it as a decentralized exchange? Or that was originally probably one of the functions that it was made to serve?
So when it comes to the economic functionality of Bitcoin and blockchains beyond Bitcoin, I think one functionality that cryptocurrencies alleviated or provided was alleviating the problem of transfers and settlement across jurisdiction. So here I'm thinking about cross-country money transfer, which with traditional banking is costly and takes time. And in some, especially for some international transfers, it's even costlier and takes more time than what we imagine when we are sending money from the US. So in a lot of developing countries, cryptocurrencies, starting with Bitcoin and later going to more stable currencies than volatile Bitcoin, have been used to a large extent for cross-border payments. Now, moving from Bitcoin, going beyond Bitcoin to Ethereum allows for this layer of applications, which Bitcoin is not built for. On Ethereum and other blockchains that are of similar structure like Ethereum, we have the application layer. This is what allows us to have NFTs. This is what allows us to have games on blockchain in this decentralized system. And I think the biggest activity on Ethereum right now and on those blockchains is decentralized finance and decentralized exchanges, where users can switch tokens or swap tokens in pairs. So this is like trading, but they can do it in an automated way via smart contract applications that are sitting on the blockchain.
So as an antitrust lawyer, when we hear the word decentralized, we tend to associate that with fragmented, competitive. Is that the case with respect to blockchain? Are there parts of the system that are not decentralized, more centralized, where we could be concerned about competition issues?
So kind of one very surprising thing for me as I was looking at the development of the scene since 2011 is how initially Bitcoin was envisioned as this peer-to-peer system where individuals directly connect and use the system directly, the blockchain, in order to transfer Bitcoin. And this was, in a way, premise of all the blockchains created later after Bitcoin. At the same time, what we are seeing is that right now, what we call crypto is really multiple layers of middlemen. It's basically dominated by layers and layers of intermediaries. So right now, a user does not directly interact with Ethereum. It interacts with a wallet interacts with a builder interacts with a relay, which only then interacts with a blockchain. And this is true infrastructure intermediary on top of that. And all these layers did not exist a decade ago. So we are seeing creation of those layers of interactions. And what is even more, fascinating for me, but a little bit scary, is that each of these layers has its own network effects, economies of scale, lock-in effects, which in fact are creating economic centralization forces. So even though the envisioned architecture is decentralized and architecture allows for decentralization, once the architecture meets economic forces that are very strongly nudging it towards centralization, we end up with quite concentrated economic equilibrium.
That's very interesting. Professor, can we talk in a bit more detail about the network effects in every layer that you just mentioned? And how is that related to classic research on network effects, for example, like social media and other networks?
When we think about social networks, we think about strong network effects leading to dominant players. And I remember not so long ago, the defense of then Facebook, when it was still called Facebook, was we are not dominating the market because it is so easy to create a social network. Anyone on the internet can create and can program a social network. So we are not dominating the market. This is a choice of the users. But we do know from economics on platforms and on network effects that just programming social network and offering the software is not going to bring users unless there is already critical mass. You already need to have a critical mass to create network effects so that you can attract more people. So this is, in a similar way, the promise of open architecture is not necessarily, again, surviving the economic forces and network effects. So how does it look like for the different layers of blockchain? Let me maybe start with protocol layer. Let's start from the bottom of the cake. So we have the bottom of the cake, and this is the protocol layer. And what we said about the cake is that we have the protocol and the functionality is accessed through tokens, and the real functionality, big functionality is created by applications, by dApps. Now, if we have a lot of users on Ethereum, this is going to attract a lot of app developers who are going to create more and better apps. This is going to attract users, which in turn is going to attract more and better app developers. And this is why we can see that the Ethereum is still the dominant blockchain platform, even though there have been many more platforms that have been created since, but they are not getting the same level of activity as Ethereum. So this is one example of network effects leading to dominance in a very expected way through network effects, because this is the same as we have seen in any two-sided market where we have apps and users. Now, like I said, when users are interacting with applications, they are not really interacting directly with the protocol because those transactions are sent through wallets to block builders. Block builders need to create the blocks, put those blocks on the blockchain, and only then all those machines are going to agree on the state, and only then those transactions are recorded and executed. Now, what we are seeing at the level of block builders, which is in principle decentralized and democratic, and anybody can become a block builder, yet we see that the 90% of blocks are created by 4 builders. And the largest builder, Titan, is creating 50% of the blocks. So why do we see this concentration? Well, there are economies of scale and there are network effects. This is like a double whammy when it comes to concentration effect. And both of these forces come from the fact that if the transactions are out in the open, because blockchains in principle are transparent, transactions are sent to the public network where all the potential builders can see the transactions and collect them, these transactions can be front run or exploited. And if they can be front run and exploited, then on one hand, a larger block builder that collects these transactions, when they have a lot of scale, they can run a lot of simulations. They have put a lot of money and capital behind the servers and equipment to run a lot of simulations, how to extract the most value. And if they extract the most value, then they have more money to win the auction, to be the next winner and build the next block. So this is the economies of scale. Now, the flip side is when users don't want their transactions to be exploited, they don't put it out in the open, in the public space, in the public mempool. Instead, they are sending their transactions privately, directly to a particular block builder so that nobody else can extract the value. Now, if they are sending it to one block builder, they want to send it to a block builder that has the highest chance to add their transaction to the next block. So they are going to send it to the largest block builder. Now, the largest block builder is going to attract more of the private order flow. With more private order flow, again, they can collect more fees from private order flow, which is again putting them in a better position to pay more, bid more in the auction to win the next block. So a larger builder is going to be more attractive and retain its position, dominant position. And this is both network effects and economies of scale that lead to this concentration where the largest block builder has 50% of the blocks being built, and the second one has 30% of the blocks being built, and then we have more of the exponential distribution.
So you've kind of laid out the layers in which we see some concentration due to network effects and economies of scale. That in and of itself is not an antitrust violation. Is there conduct that these dominant players can exercise or have exercised, in your view, that raises antitrust concerns?
So before expanding on that, let me maybe discuss one more layer or two more layers. So those are like the icing between the pieces of cake that hold it together. Those are the connectivity layers. So specifically, I'm thinking about relays and wallets. Wallets are collecting transactions from the users. And then there is a very heavy lock-in and default bias. Whenever I started my initial crypto holdings in one wallet, people typically stay with the same wallet. They don't move it to a different wallet. So there is a big lock-in. MetaMask is the largest wallet. And then wallets are sending transactions to the builders. And builders, to interact with Ethereum protocol, they send their blocks and proposed blocks through relays. Now, each of these other layers has its own lock-in effects and network effects. I'm not going to get into it in the detail, but what we are also seeing is vertical integration. So we can see that the same owner, for example, a centralized exchange like Coinbase, has stake in Ethereum, has its own relays, has its own builders, has its own wallets. So we see this vertical integration. Now, what can happen? Like, what is the type of harm that we are seeing in this market that may be effect of this concentration and vertical integration? So first of all, with vertical integration, with concentration, it is difficult for new competitors to come in. It is difficult to come in as a small player, because if you are coming in as a small builder and you're not connected to wallets and you're not connected to relays, and the existing relays and wallets are only working with specific builders and they're not going to route trades to you, then you are going to be excluded from this market. When it comes to the harm to the customers, the harm may look a little bit different than the traditional price and output harm that we are used to in antitrust. So here, the main harm that we are seeing is execution of trades. So trades may be delayed, they may be censored, so not executed at all, and they may be exploited, for example, in sandwich attacks or in front running. And this, in a way, is kind of relating to output, especially if you don't execute the trade. And it is related to maybe the effective price, but not in a way that can be straightforwardly applied in traditional antitrust terms. So, for example, if a user is losing $200 due to a sandwich attacks, is this a price increase? Is this a trade loss? Or is this a fairness issue? It's not clear which antitrust issue it is or competitive issue it is going to invoke.
If one thing is true about questions related to competitive harm, is that courts and regulators frequently prefer measurable harms. Do we have any empirical metrics in the literature or being developed right now? For example, do we have any experimental settings or event study settings that could identify potential competitive harm in a blockchain setting?
So we have plenty of quasi experiments, because this space, with the frequent protocol changes, outages, and all sorts of shocks, does provide us with empirically rich environment. And also we do have a lot of data that is recorded on the blockchain in a quite public way. But we do not have a lot of studies or measures. This is in fact something that I'm working on right now, is how to measure the harm and how to prove the harm to the users. So there are some measures on trying to assess the level of exploit of the trade. So how much value was extracted, for example, through sandwich attacks or through front running. So sandwich attacks, by the way, is a front running followed by back running, sandwiched together. So there are some measures being developed around that. However, there is no good measure around censoring and delay. And this is because if a transaction is censored, we may never know that it was posted. We may never know that it was demanded. So it's difficult to prove that it was not executed. On the other hand, delays as well, we don't know when we cannot prove from outside of a relay or outside of the builder when the builder received this transaction. So we don't know whether they delayed it on purpose because it was not paying enough fees, or maybe because they were waiting for a better possibility of exploiting it in the front running, or whether they executed it right away.
So not to bias your answer on this question, but it's a complex environment and a lot of difficult moving pieces that may be hard to quantify. Given all of that, I think there's a lot of talk about more regulation of cryptocurrency, and others who say existing competition laws and consumer protection laws are enough sort of on the back end to regulate cryptocurrency. Do you have a preferred approach? And sort of maybe it's a different answer across the layers, but tell us how you would structure a regulatory ecosystem to govern crypto.
So I think that the layers that you mentioned would be the key here. And first of all, I think that the existing antitrust principles are enough because we see the same forces playing out. But I think that it is important for antitrust to see in the right light where the power is actually sitting. So we are dealing with network effects, with concentration, with foreclosure, with vertical integration, all the traditional things. But they are done by not so traditional actors and players. I think that it is not even common to be aware of different layers that are playing a role and different economic forces in different layers. And being aware of those different layers and watching out where bottlenecks are forming is crucial, because bottlenecks will be forming around different players in block building than in relays, than in wallets. But each of them may have enough market power to cause harm. And even worse, if they are vertically integrating. So with a lot of network effects and economies of scale, there is a huge potential tipping in crypto market. This market is developing very rapidly. So we don't want the first generation of innovators to dominate the market and ossify into monopolies or oligopolies. So it is important for antitrust to be aware where to look for the sources of power. And this is not the protocol level. The one thing that I would add is that we have special antitrust issue and consumer protection for financial services providers. And none of the blockchain entities are classified as financial services providers. So maybe recognizing that these are actually financial services may add the bite to the existing regulation to protect customers and protect competition in the market.
And so from a competition authority standpoint, if we assume that we have a blockchain ecosystem where we have a concentrated node of power, people often consider remedies in other environments. Are there remedies that look credible to you that we could go after in a blockchain case, or you think they're unrealistic?
So there are remedies, kind of traditional remedies that would work in blockchain environment. So for example, preventing vertical integration, mandating access to the infrastructure, and mandating transparency. So for example, reporting when the trade was received and what was the time to execution of the trade may be very helpful. There is, however, very important limitation aspect to it. And this is that many of those players at each layer actually are not sitting in any particular jurisdiction. So when we are looking at the 4 biggest block builders, 2 of them are sitting in our firms in the US. So we know where to go if we need it. And we could do that. But the 2 of them, we actually don't know where they are located. So for Beaver Build, we suspect they are in Europe, but we don't know for sure. For rsync, we have no clue. They are globally distributed or globally mobile. And then even though there are tools that could be effective, it is not really clear how to execute those tools.
Certainly a challenge for regulating these actors if we don't know where they are. So Hanna, you've built up an immense expertise in this area. Can you tell us a little bit personally about yourself and what got you into blockchain? And for folks who are really interested in this space, do you have any suggestions, recommendations for what they should do and what they should read?
Ooh. So in fact, the reason why I got interested in cryptocurrencies and in blockchain was because I was working on platforms. So coming from platforms background, I was actually working on currencies, digital currencies created by platforms, specifically Facebook credits. That was like older iteration of Facebook currency, Amazon coin, but also currencies that were created by games like World of Warcraft Gold and Linden dollars in Second Life. So I was looking at the design of those currencies and the functionality and how they relate to the platform's functionality and the network effects. And this is why I remember that it was specifically 2011 when I was already working on these questions, and I heard about Bitcoin in the context of WikiLeaks affair. So you may remember or not, but WikiLeaks with Julian Assange got on the bedside of the government in 2011. And with encouragement of the government, all the traditional payment systems cut off ties to WikiLeaks, so it wouldn't be possible to donate, to make donations to WikiLeaks. And then WikiLeaks announced that they will take donations in Bitcoin because it is outside of the government-regulated payment systems. And this is what got me very interested in how it actually works, and especially in the context of, it's a platform. And also, how do you design such a currency? And given that I was thinking how different design currencies are used differently, how this one will be used. So this is what got me interested. And since then, the development in this space has been remarkably exciting. Right? I mean, since 2011, we had so many altcoins and then smart contracts and Ethereum and all that, and DeFi and all the DAOs, all the other new blockchains as well. Where to start? I mean, of course, I do recommend my book, because the purpose behind this book was to explain how blockchain works from the economics point of view, not from technical point of view, but from economics point of view, without equations and without a lot of jargon. So this is it's explanation at the quite basic, plain language level. And this is where I would encourage to start. And there is a number of fantastic podcasts that are centered around crypto and blog posts. I'm personally biased towards academic writing, so I would recommend the crypto podcasts that come out of Columbia University that I find fantastic, and blog posts that come out of A16Z that are very well informed. But there are many, many more that are very good sources, very good resources.
Great. And for our listeners, we'll, of course, link to Hanna's book and some of these resources as well for those that are interested after this episode. So, Hanna, before we let you go, we always have our last segment, what we call the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
So in traditional times, you would actually have a physical hat and you would draw out a number, but I will ask you to pick a number 1 through 21.
16.
16. Okay. So do you like to cook? And if so, what is your specialty dish?
So the answer is I do not like to cook. And in fact, I have a story around it. So instead of saying what my signature dish is, let me serve you a story. So when I was on the first real date with my current husband of 20 years, we were kind of going on a date. But when things got serious, I told him, I don't know how to cook and I'm not interested in learning. Only if you're okay with that, we can proceed. So still, I do not cook. And when we have friends over for dinner, we go to a restaurant.
Well, Hanna, thank you again for your time. This has been very educational for all of us and for all of our listeners. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.